Oil has crashed from $115 down to about $80 at this time. We have Bitcoin going from $65,000 back yesterday from market futures open to about 69,500, give or take, right now. Obviously, the stock market is now green for the day, and there's a lot of speculation with this whole kind of war conflict going on with, is Trump going to announce that the war is going to be over? Kind of like what's going on, because I think that most of the media has been like gaslit into thinking that, something particular is going on when I think it's about something else. So before I get into this, make sure you subscribe, turn on your bell notifications. Everything I say is very time sensitive. Now, welcome back, guys. I know I've been kind of absent, and there's just, a few reasons for that. I've been traveling, number one. Number two, just not much has really changed in terms of like Bitcoin. I know that that's why most of you guys are here. Obviously, we've been ranging in this very boring range. And there's just been like all this kind of like doomer, gloomer, kind of like, stock market, global recession kind of collapse going on. And, a lot of people are looking at this and they're thinking like, this is going to be like the new World War III. This is not going to be over anytime soon. You could question the motives as to like what's actually going on. And so I just kind of want to hop in here and give you guys my kind of time sensitive update, right? Because, I've been pretty spot on for the last couple months, and I think that there's just a lot going under the radar. And so not to just drag this whole like video out, I kind of want to be a little bit more concise, but what I think is essentially going on is basically a trade agreement where it comes to just like the restructuring of these like decade long kind of deals, right? And so I don't think it's a coincidence that Venezuela was targeted for their oil. Obviously, we have Russia being a big manufacturer of oil as well. Obviously, the Middle East, there's a lot going on with Iran, the Strait of Hormuz. And basically, those that don't know, the Strait of Hormuz is a trade route where it accounts for basically 25% of the oil supply. And that would severely impact, UK, various countries around the Gulf, all that kind of stuff. And so that's why you see the price of oil basically surging, right? And so I think that what's been going on behind the scenes is the powers that be that basically controls the governments and the presidents, they've basically manufactured this kind of like back-end deal where I think that the trade agreements have been basically done. And I think that what we're seeing is basically how we're going to get there and basically have this new kind of rail of different like, alliances and trade agreements. So in summary, I think what's kind of going on is we see, obviously we seized a lot of oil from Venezuela. And, the UK has been very, very weird when it comes to like the trade agreements. And so this has basically put a cripple on them because they basically have like, I think 3 days left of their supply. Obviously with the Strait of Hormuz being partially shut off, mostly actually, that's going to affect like trade, right? And I think that there's nobody that's actually benefiting from this sort of conflict, right? And that's why I wasn't really anxious or like, hesitant to call this a war, because I don't think that that's what it is. That's not what we're kind of looking at. I don't think that any country basically benefits from this. Now, obviously you can make the argument that, the United States is doing another country's bidding and all this kind of stuff, but I think that that's all just noise. And I think that that's what it pretty much has been for a long time, because people tend to get caught up in like the narratives and like what's being pushed on like the news, right? And it makes them make very emotional decisions. And behind the scenes, there's just a lot more at play. And when you look at this from just a trade sort of like currency war, because I think it's more so about the dominance of the dollar, or even like the Chinese yuan and all that kind of stuff. Because when you look at how all these basically oil, agreements and relationships are kind of handled, you can make the case that Russia has basically a monopoly when it comes to how they can basically agree with like China or just like border countries, the UK obviously, and obviously we have the United States, right, which we want to be basically like drill as Trump was wanting to do. And so basically what I think is happening right now is we're just seeing this whole sort of trade agreement kind of come to fruition. And so I think that this is going to be over short term, probably within the next, maybe week or so. Obviously, this is like rightfully scaring the markets. A lot of the stocks have been massively selling off. We have, obviously gold was spiking to record highs. There was a lot of rumors that it was going to go to like $200 a barrel. I don't really think that that's going to happen. I think that these are all just basically manufactured, agreements that have already been done. And so it's just, you always have to look at it that way, right? Like it's always who stands to benefit. And when you look at this through like a geopolitical kind of landscape, there's not really any country that is going to be benefiting from this. Now, obviously, Dubai has been decimated when it comes to like their overall like resources, their landscape, the narrative of, Dubai is super safe. That's where all the influencers are going. It's really good to do business there because of the capital gains. It looks to be like super fancy. I think that there was like speculation that they were going to make like a second kind of like Las Vegas around that kind of area. And so that narrative has kind of been put to rest, in my opinion, too. Now, I don't know if that's just like collateral damage or part of, whatever, but I don't think anything has changed. I do think that, obviously we have a new Fed chair stepping in within the next couple months. I say that because obviously, even though he's going to get sworn in, it's probably about a month or so whenever we're going to see him actually take place and make any sort of like, monetary policy change, right? So to kind of summarize, I am not too worried about this whole like conflict with Iran. I think that there's going to be some sort of agreement, and I think that Trump is, no matter what, going to claim victory. He's going to make a speech tonight, and so they need to kind of save face, in my opinion, because he's had a massive egg thrown on it, right? Like, he was the president of, peace. We don't see that. He was a pro crypto president. Crypto's been in shambles for basically the last year. He was the, peace through strength. We've never been at all like more odds with, in my opinion, like just like the media, every other country. We're basically seen as like a bully at this point, right? And I think rightfully so. I think a lot of people that voted for the current administration is very disappointed. And so he has to basically be put in this like impossible situation. And obviously we have just, tensions around the whole world, right? So, I don't think that this is going to last long for that very reason. I think the price of oil is also going to take a little bit of time to kind of play out, because it could basically translate into inflation, and that would obviously affect the monetary policy. Not to mention we have about 90,000 jobs that were basically reported as lost last week. So that's not good. That would basically put us into stagflation, which is like very, very bearish for the economy. That would throw us into obviously a recession. And there's a lot of fear about a whole global recession. So again, no country really wants this because it's going to affect trade, right? Like, China needs to be a net exporter, right? They rely on basically the United States and other countries to buy their goods, and we basically depend on them to supply it. So there's not really a winning scenario here, right? And I think that the whole geopolitical stuff, like, it's just all noise, right? And I think that a lot of people get caught up in that, right? And so they're not really paying attention to like the massive chess game that's being played behind the scenes, right? So with that being said, I do think that we're going to see that this whole oil price, like I said, it's already around $80. It could settle around here. It could go back up short term, but I think that we're going to have some sort of resolution within the next week. Countries cannot afford to have that go on longer. I think the risk on assets like Bitcoin, I think that that's going to be a beneficiary net. Now, I don't know if that's going to be choppy short term, because obviously there's been its own separate set of issues because of the whole Clarity Act, the Market Structure Act, all that kind of stuff. But I do think that it's going to be a beneficiary to this, because obviously there's a lot of countries that are very, or I would say that they're in a precarious situation where they're losing hope on their current like currencies, or just like the fiat system in general. And so naturally that's going to attract, buying of things like Bitcoin, which is like a scarce asset that's borderless. You can buy this anywhere in the world. And so if you're maybe a country that's being prey to like hyperinflation or just, tyrannical kind of nature, you would opt out of the system by going into Bitcoin, right? Same with precious metals, all that kind of stuff. So I think that it's just a matter of time to where Bitcoin is going to actually like catch its bid and kind of show its strength. And it tends to trade kind of counter to like whatever's going on, right? So like, we all thought that Bitcoin was going to go down to, $30,000, $20,000 because of all this kind of war conflict. And it hasn't really done that. It's been pretty strong, relatively speaking. And so again, like, this is why I always tell you guys, like, don't be leveraging, don't make short-term basically decisions, right? Because you always need to have a long time frame whenever it comes to these investment strategies. And historically speaking, any kind of like war conflict or any kind of monetary change is usually bullish for any kind of like asset that you hold, right? Because everything translates to basically inflation and money printing. So that's naturally going to bring up the price of whatever asset that you're invested in. So with that being said, I'm going to go work out. I'm going to start making more videos, I guess, because I don't want to leave you guys, high and dry. And I kind of want to make, some kind of tutorials of how I kind of trade these markets based on, short-term kind of fun, right? But that's obviously just a strategy to either, hedge against whatever my spot positions are, or just make maybe short-term money off of like speculative trades, right? So with that being said, I will see you guys soon. Bye.